She's been photographed as a British schoolgirl with a soft-faced, innocent smile. She's now called the White Widow, is believed to be a committed jihadist, and Interpol has just issued a worldwide red notice.
Samantha Lewthwaite, once a quiet British schoolgirl, would later become the White Widow, one of the world's most wanted terrorists. From the calm suburbs of Buckinghamshire to orchestrating deadly attacks across Africa, she used fake identities, slipped through borders, and vanished into global infamy. And she's just one chilling name on this list. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for true crime stories that go deeper than the headlines. Because what you're about to see will shatter everything you thought you knew about terrorism. These aren't the usual suspects. They were teachers, students, mothers, who turned into killers. Forget what you think you know. These are the 9 most dangerous women terrorists in history, from a 60-year-old bomber to a teenage assassin, who changed history through terror. Let's count them down by age.
She became the first woman ever to make the FBI's most wanted terrorist list. In addition, the FBI in the state of New Jersey doubled the reward for her capture to $2 million.
It's May 2nd, 1973, just past midnight. A car pulled over on the New Jersey Turnpike, supposedly for a broken taillight. Inside were 3 members of the Black Liberation Army, Sundiata Acoli, Zaid Malik Shakur, and a woman named Assata Shakur. Minutes later, 2 people are dead, a state trooper and Zaid, and Assata's bleeding from gunshot wounds in both arms. That night set off one of the most intense manhunts in U.S. history, and Assata, once known as Joanne Chesimard, became the face of a national controversy. Was she a terrorist or a freedom fighter? A cold-blooded cop killer? Or a woman targeted by the government because of her politics? Decades later, she's still at the center of that question. The FBI calls her a domestic terrorist. Cuba, on the other hand, calls her a political exile. And Assata calls herself a 20th century escaped slave. Let's go to 1947. Assata was born as Joanne Byron. She grows up bouncing between Queens and North Carolina, raised partly by her grandparents, who taught her to never lower her gaze, even in the segregated South. She comes of age during the Civil Rights era, when being African American and outspoken was already dangerous. By her teens, she had dropped out of high school and was working low-wage jobs just to get by. But everything shifted in the 1960s when she started reading, questioning, and listening, especially to the growing Black liberation movements. She studies her history, questions U.S. foreign policy, and eventually joins the Black Panthers. It's not long before she moved toward a more radical group, the Black Liberation Army, BLA, which supported armed resistance against systemic racism and police brutality. To her supporters, Assata wasn't just another activist. She's educated, unapologetic, and a woman with a razor-sharp mind and a deep sense of justice. To the U.S. government, though, she's something else entirely: dangerous. Between 1971 and 73, Assata's tied to a long list of criminal cases, bank robberies, attempted murders, and police ambushes. Most of the charges were either dismissed or ended in acquittals, but the 1973 shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike was different. Assata said she was shot while her hands were raised. Medical experts testified that her injuries made it impossible for her to have fired a weapon. There was no gunpowder residue on her hands. Her fingerprints weren't found on any of the weapons recovered at the scene. Still, she's convicted of murder, based on a law that allowed someone to be held responsible simply for being present during the crime. She was sentenced to life in prison, but in 1979, with help from the BLA and the radical May 19th Communist Organization, she escaped. Her accomplices showed up as visitors, smuggled in guns, and took prison guards hostage. No one was killed, but Assata vanished. It would take years before the world learned where she'd gone. 1984, Assata Shakur surfaces in Havana. She'd been granted political asylum in Cuba, where she still lives to this day. To the Cuban government, she's a victim of racial and political persecution. To the U.S., she became a symbol of defiance. So much so that in 2013, she became the first woman ever added to the FBI's most wanted terrorist list. And a $2 million bounty still hangs over her head.
openly and freely in Cuba, she continues to maintain and promote her terrorist ideology. She provides anti-U.S. government speeches.
Asada, now in her 70s, has never stopped speaking out. Her autobiography, Asada, became essential reading in activist circles. Hip-hop artists like Common and Public Enemy have honored her in their lyrics, and her name still shows up on protest signs and university walls, usually followed by the phrase, "She who struggles."
An anonymous Jihad Jane wrote, "I'm so bored, I want to scream." But prosecutors say at the time, the woman behind the veil, Colleen LaRose, was actually very busy inside her suburban Philadelphia home, mapping terror plans.
June 5th, 1963. That's the day Colleen LaRose was born in Michigan. No one could have guessed that decades later, this small-town American woman would earn an international arrest warrant, a new name, Jihad Jane, and a place on the FBI's radar for conspiring to kill a Swedish artist. But her path, like so many others, didn't change overnight. It shifted slowly and quietly. Colleen's childhood was traumatic. Her parents divorced when she was 3. Worse, she later revealed that she'd been sexually abused by her biological father for years. By her early teens, she had run away and was surviving through prostitution. At 16, Colleen gets married, but the relationship didn't last. Years later, after a second marriage ended, she moved on to Pennsylvania with a boyfriend and helped care for his elderly father. But by 2005, Colleen's world had begun to crack. She had lost her brother and father in quick succession. She attempted to take her own life, and when she survived, she started looking for something, anything to give her life meaning. She found it online. Now, it started with a chance meeting in a bar in Amsterdam. A Muslim man sparks her interest, and when she gets back to the US, she dives headfirst into Islamic websites. She converted to Islam through a mentor she met over Instant Messenger, takes the name Fatima, and begins calling herself Jihad Jane online. And then came the radical videos, war footage, claims of US aggression, images of Muslims suffering in Palestine and Iraq. Soon after, her social media lit up with angry posts, and she pledged support to jihadist fighters. 2009, Swedish artist Lars Vilks outraged Muslims worldwide after drawing an inappropriate cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. But Colleen wasn't just angry, she wanted to act. Soon she's sending messages promising to find and kill him. One message read,
"I will make this my goal till I achieve it or die trying."
That August, she steals her boyfriend's passport, buys a ticket, and flies to Europe. Authorities say her goal was clear: join up with extremists, train, and kill Vilks. She travels through London, the Netherlands, and Ireland, where she connected with an online contact she'd never met, Ali Sharaf Damachi, a known recruiter. Another American woman, Jamie Pauline Ramirez, joined them soon after, bringing her son along. She married Damachi the day after landing. Together, they form what prosecutors later described as a small terror cell, fueled by ideology, online connections, and grand promises of martyrdom. What LaRose didn't know was that the FBI had already been watching. July 2009. She's questioned by agents, but denies everything. Soon after, she panics and flees to Europe. By October 2009, though, she's back. And the moment she lands in Philadelphia, she's arrested. Authorities kept her detention secret for months. They were still trying to track the rest of the cell. And when her indictment was finally unsealed, it shocked the public. A white blonde woman from the burbs accused of planning a terrorist plot. It shattered assumptions and made headlines worldwide. 2011, Colleen pleaded guilty and admitted to trying to support terrorism, plotting to kill in a foreign country, and lying to the FBI. She's sent to 10 years in a federal prison. By all accounts, her time behind bars was quiet. She spent most of her days in solitary confinement, cut off from the outside world. But even in isolation, she found a way to connect. Inmates at the federal prison in Philadelphia had their own makeshift communication system. If you scoop the water out of your toilet bowl just right, you can speak through the pipes. They call it talking on the bowls. And through this underground network, Colleen found voices on the other end. That's how she got close to this other inmate. Eventually, the two would get engaged, and he even promised to convert to Islam once he got out. November 2018, Colleen walks out of prison after serving her full sentence. There were no press conferences, no apologies, and no clear answers about what kind of person she'd become. Some experts call Colleen LaRose an outlier, a deeply troubled woman looking for meaning who got caught in something far bigger than herself. Others say she was fully aware, fully responsible. Maybe it's both. But what is clear is that her story isn't just about radicalization, but about how anyone, regardless of background, can be pulled into extremism when they feel lost, angry, or unseen.
Tonight, this woman, seen in a suicide vest, is at the center of intense negotiations between ISIS and one of America's closest allies.
November 9th, 2005. It was supposed to be a night of joy. Inside the Radisson Hotel in Amman, Jordan, a wedding was in full swing. Families dancing, people laughing, tables stacked with food. But within minutes, the celebration turns into chaos. A series of coordinated bombings ripped through 3 hotels in the city, killing 60 people and injuring over 100 more. One of those attacks was supposed to be carried out by a woman. Her name was Sajida al-Rishawi, and she walked into the wedding hall with an explosives belt strapped around her waist. She wasn't alone. Her husband, also wearing his suicide belt, stood across the room. When the moment came, his device exploded, killing 38 people instantly. But Sajida's bomb didn't go off. She panicked, blending into the chaos, and slipped out with the crowd. Hours later, she's arrested. In 1970, Sajida was born in Iraq, in the city of Ramadi, a city that, back then, looked nothing like the war-torn headlines it would later make. Her brother, according to reports, was a close aide to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the brutal leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the man many considered the ideological father of ISIS. So it wouldn't take long before Sajida found herself pulled into that world as well. According to Jordanian authorities, Sajida and her husband crossed into Jordan days before the bombing, using fake passports. She later confessed, calmly, on national television, describing how her husband taught her how to use that explosive belt, how they walked into that hotel ballroom together, and how she failed to detonate her device. She even demonstrated how it was supposed to work, standing there with the belt still strapped to her body, held together by tape. She showed no emotion, no fear, and absolutely no regret. Her words were,
My husband detonated his bomb. I tried to detonate mine, but it failed. People fled. I fled with him.
2006, Sajida sentenced to death, but a moratorium on executions in Jordan delayed it. For nearly a decade, she sat in prison, out of the public eye, almost forgotten. Then in 2015, ISIS brought her back into the spotlight. The group had captured 2 hostages, Kenji Goto, a Japanese journalist, and Muath al-Qasasba, a Jordanian fighter pilot. They issued an ultimatum to the Jordanian authorities.
Release Sajida al-Rishawi, or we'll kill him.
It was a twisted negotiation. They posted videos online of the hostages and called Sajida their imprisoned sister and demanded her freedom in exchange for the pilot's life. Jordan refused to comply without proof that al-Qasasbeh was still alive. ISIS never provided it. They just responded by executing Goto, then being burnt alive in a cage. A horrifying image that shocked the world and enraged Jordan. Hours after that footage surfaced, Jordan executed Sajida al-Rishawi, along with another convicted terrorist, by hanging. She was 44 years old, remembered only as a failed bomber, the one whose device malfunctioned, the one who survived until she didn't.
A U.S.-trained Pakistani scientist convicted of trying to kill U.S. agents and military officers in Afghanistan has been sentenced to 86 years in prison.
July 17th, 2008. In Ghazni, Afghanistan, a woman in a burqa is crouching on the ground outside the governor's compound, clutching 2 small bags, while a young boy stood beside her. Afghan police, growing suspicious, approached her, but they found that she didn't speak the local language, and no one knew who she was. Hours later, the woman's in custody. Her name is Afia Siddiqui. and her story's a chilling blend of genius, mystery, and terror. Afia Siddiqui was once a brilliant neuroscientist, MIT graduate, PhD from Brandeis, fluent in multiple languages, deeply religious, and fiercely intelligent. But how does she go from academic halls in Boston to being labeled one of the most feared women in the world, sentenced to 86 years in a U.S. federal prison? We go to 1972. Born in Karachi, Afia grows up in a devout Muslim household with strong academic values. Her mother was an Islamic teacher, and her father was a British-trained neurosurgeon. At 18, Afia moves to the U.S. for college and soon transfers to MIT. Friends described her as soft-spoken, focused, and deeply committed to her faith. She didn't party, rarely watched TV, and just threw herself into volunteer work, especially for Muslim causes. Later, while pursuing her PhD in neuroscience at Brandeis, she married a Pakistani doctor in an arranged marriage and started a family. But alongside motherhood and academia, Afia's ideologies seemed to grow more extreme. She began raising funds for jihad-linked groups and distributing literature advocating for Islamic law. And then after 9/11, things escalated. 2003, just days after the 9/11 planner Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was captured, he named Afia Siddiqui as someone involved with Al-Qaeda, allegedly as a courier and financial facilitator. Just a few days later, she disappeared. For 5 years, no one could confirm where she was. Her family claimed that she was kidnapped with her children and secretly detained by U.S. forces, while others believe she went underground, helping Al-Qaeda. Some said that she remarried a known Al-Qaeda operative. None of it was confirmed. But her disappearance became a rallying cry in Pakistan, where many believed that she was a victim of torture and political injustice. Then came her reappearance in 2008, and it only deepened the mystery. When Afghan police arrested her, they discovered a staggering cache in her bags, notes on biological weapons, a list of American landmarks like the Empire State Building and Wall Street, and small bottles containing chemicals, including sodium cyanide, a highly toxic poison. But that wasn't what landed her behind bars for life. According to U.S. officials, while in custody at an Afghan police station, Afia allegedly grabbed a U.S. soldier's rifle and fired at him and others in the room. She missed, but was shot in the stomach when they returned fire. She, however, denied ever touching the gun. Now, the truth about that moment remains unclear, but it was enough for the U.S. to indict her. 2010. Afia is convicted of attempted murder and assault. She's not charged with terrorism, but the trial was anything but ordinary. Throughout, Afia claimed that she was framed, abused, and had spent years in secret prisons. She shouted about conspiracies, accusing her Jewish lawyers of bias, and at one point demanded that the jurors be DNA tested for Zionist backgrounds. In the end, prosecutors succeeded in painting her as this dangerous extremist with the skills to carry out a very sophisticated attack on U.S. soil, and the court didn't buy her claims of mental illness. She was sentenced to 86 years in prison. In Pakistan, this sparked a firestorm. Protests broke out across the country. Politicians called her the daughter of the nation. Others, including her ex-husband, said she wasn't innocent, just someone facing the consequences of her own choices. Over the years, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS have tried to trade multiple hostages for Afia Siddiqui's release. None of those attempts worked. Even in 2022, a man stormed a synagogue in Texas, took hostages, and demanded her freedom. He was killed, and Afia stayed behind bars. Today, you can find her at the Federal Medical Center in Carswell, Fort Worth, Texas. But apparently Afia never wanted anyone to act in her name. During her sentencing, she surprised everyone. She forgave the soldier who shot her, and even forgave the judge, saying,
I am a Muslim, but I do love America too. I do not want any bloodshed. I really want to make peace and end the wars.
When asked if she wanted to appeal, she shook her head, saying,
I appeal to God, and He hears me.
And then a moment came no one saw coming. She turns to her supporters and says,
Forgive everybody in my case, please. Don't get angry. If I'm not angry, why should anyone else be?
As the hearing ended, the judge looked at her and said,
I wish you the very best going forward.
and she thanked him. And just like that, a woman once called Lady Al-Qaeda was speaking of peace and receiving kindness from the very system that had just sentenced her to spend the rest of her life behind bars.
Jordanian authorities are planning to extradite a woman who was convicted of planting a bomb in 2001 that killed 16 people and injured 130 in Jerusalem pizza parlor Sbarro.
It's August 9th, 2001, a warm afternoon in Jerusalem. The Sbarro Pizzeria on Jaffa Road was packed with families grabbing lunch and tourists soaking in the city's energy. No one noticed the quiet young woman guiding a man into the restaurant. Minutes later, the man detonated a bomb hidden in a guitar case, ripping through the crowded restaurant, killing 16 people and injuring 130. Half these victims were children. The woman who brought the bomber there was Ahlam Tamimi, just 20 years old at the time, and a journalism student at Birzeit University. 1980, Ahlam's born in Zarqa, Jordan, to a Palestinian family originally from Nabis Ali, a small village in the occupied West Bank. Growing up during the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, she gets to witness firsthand the violence and unrest that plagued the region. And by the time she's a university student, the Second Intifada, also known as Al-Aqsa Intifada, had erupted. It's a bloody uprising, sparked by decades of military occupation, expanding Israeli settlements, and a deepening sense of hopelessness amongst Palestinians. Over 3,000 Palestinians were killed during that period, including around 1,000 children. Ahlam later said that she witnessed friends and fellow students shot dead in cold blood by Israeli forces, and that her own village was raided again and again. Now, some call what came next radicalization. Others call it resistance. For her, it was a path she believed was justified. But the victims were all civilians, and Ahlam wasn't just involved in the bombing. She planned it. She picked the target for maximum impact, a spot known to be crowded with families. She disguised herself and the bomber to avoid suspicion, and after it was done, she reported on the attack for her part-time job at a local news outlet. But the most chilling part came later, in interviews. When asked how she felt after the bombing, she described hearing the rising death toll on the bus ride home. 3 dead, then 5, then 7. She smiled and admitted that she'd hoped for more. When she was arrested, Tamimi received 16 life sentences plus 15 years. But in 2011, after serving just 10 years, she was released as part of a prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas. The deal freed over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for a single Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. Tamimi was exiled to Jordan, where she was welcomed as a hero. Many people here saw her not as a criminal, but as somebody who stood up to what they viewed as daily injustices under occupation. Since her release, Tamimi has shown no remorse. Why would she? In interviews, she would express pride in the attack and has said that she would do it again if given the chance. 2013, the US DOJ files charges against her for conspiring to use a weapon of mass destruction against US nationals. As 2 Americans were among the victims. A $5 million reward is issued for information leading to her arrest, but Jordan has so far refused to extradite her, citing legal and constitutional grounds. By 2025, things began to shift. Reports surfaced that Jordan was considering her extradition in exchange for the reinstatement of financial aid, funding that had been frozen during the Doge cuts. In a more recent interview, Tamimi insisted that she never targeted Americans, nor did she kill for the sake of killing. She described what she did as part of this broader struggle for Palestinian freedom, a war, as she put it, that she didn't start.
She's been photographed as a British schoolgirl with a soft-faced, innocent smile. She's now called the White Widow, is believed to be a committed jihadist, and Interpol has just issued a worldwide red notice.
July 7th, 2005. London was just waking up when the unthinkable happened. A series of coordinated explosions tore through the city's underground trains and a bus, leaving behind a trail of destruction and 52 innocent lives lost. Among the attackers was Jermaine Lindsay, a suicide bomber His wife, Samantha Luthwaite, 8 months pregnant with their second child, would soon become a name the world wouldn't forget. Not for her grief, but for what came after. It's hard to picture the world's most wanted female terrorist sipping tea in a quiet British town. But that's exactly where Samantha's story began. 1983, born in Northern Ireland and raised in Buckinghamshire, Samantha Luthwaite was the daughter of a British soldier. She was, by all accounts, a normal girl, chatty, friendly, into sports, and had good grades in school. Nothing that screamed international fugitive. But at 17, everything shifted. Her parents split up and Samantha, shaken and searching, found comfort in an unexpected place: the Muslim neighbors across the street. Within a year, she's converted to Islam, taking the name Sharafaya, and began exploring her new faith, not with devotion, but extremism. Then came the online forums, and that's where she met Jermaine Lindsay. Both recent converts to Islam, they got married young. At first, she spoke of it like a love story, but 3 years later, Lindsay boarded a London train and killed 26 people along with himself in the 7/7 bombings. In the aftermath, Samantha gave interviews. She expressed shock, horror, and heartbreak. She called Lindsay a loving husband and a father. She claimed she had no idea he'd been radicalized. She even told her story to a tabloid, and some believed her. Others weren't so sure. But fast forward a few years, and that uncertainty turned into a full-blown suspicion. Why? Well, Samantha vanished. First from Aylesbury, then the UK altogether. And what followed was a shady trail across Africa. Fake names, quiet safe houses, whispers of bomb plots. And with each step, more lives were lost and more questions were left behind. The media called her the White Widow, turning her into a dangerous myth that grew with every whispered plot. By 2011, authorities in Kenya had her in their sights. She'd allegedly entered the country under the name Natalie Faye Webb, traveling with her children and slipping easily between identities. Kenyan officials believed she wasn't just hiding, she was organizing. They accused her of plotting attacks on hotels, churches, and bars. One grenade attack on a bar during a Euro 2012 football match in Mombasa left 3 dead. Witnesses claim they saw a white woman nearby before the blast. Still, no one could catch her.
The search is on for a terror mastermind, and the search is so urgent, they call it a red notice.
Interpol issued a red notice. Her face, once seen as a grieving widow, was now plastered across international wanted lists. She was suspected of being deeply embedded with Al-Shabaab, a Somalia-based militant group linked to Al-Qaeda. And this time, she wasn't just someone's wife. Authorities believe she was directly involved in a string of deadly terror attacks, which included grenade attacks at non-Muslim places of worship, and possibly even the massacre at Westgate Mall in Nairobi, where 71 people sadly lost their lives. Her name kept surfacing, not always with proof, but always with fear. That's the thing about Samantha Luthwaite. Even now, the full extent of her role in extremist operations remains unclear. Some say she planned attacks. Others say she was more of a facilitator, funding, recruiting, helping operatives move across borders. Some even question if she was truly a high-level operative or just a symbol. What we do know is this: she had 4 children, at least 2 husbands with terrorist ties, and left behind a digital footprint filled with jihadist propaganda, bomb-making guides, and personal writings. In one notebook seized by police, she wrote of raising her children to become mujahideen, meaning holy warriors. And yet in these same notes, there were grocery lists, beauty tips, and parenting advice. And maybe that's why experts remain divided. But one thing's for sure, Samantha Luthwaite's still out there. Or she was, long enough to leave a long and bloody trail behind her.
Police said as many as 6 members of a terrorist cell may still be on the loose. One suspected accomplice is Hayat Boumediene, the girlfriend of the terrorist who attacked the Jewish grocery store.
January 2nd, 2015. A 26-year-old woman steps off a flight from Madrid to Istanbul. Her name was Hayat Boumediene, and at first glance, nothing about her stands out. But in less than a week, her name's gonna flash across every major news outlet in France. She would vanish into Syria, and she would become one of the most wanted women in Europe. Hayat grew up in the eastern suburbs of Paris. Her parents were Algerian immigrants. Her mother had died when she was 8, and her father, distant and cold, remarried and drifted away. Hayat and her siblings were passed through the foster system, and by her teens, she was changing her surname to sound more French. She eventually worked as a cashier, and life was quiet for a little while. In 2007, everything changed when she met Mehdi Coulibaly, a man with a criminal record, a growing interest in radical ideologies, and a fierce loyalty to known jihadists in France. Their connection was instant, and they get married in a religious ceremony in 2009. From the outside, they look like a devout couple, quiet, religious, unassuming. But behind closed doors, these two were preparing for something much darker. In 2010, the two were brought in for questioning after police discover a stockpile of assault rifle ammunition in their apartment. Over the course of 4 days, Boumediene admitted she believed some terrorist attacks were justified. She also said that she and Coulibaly had visited Jamel Bagal, a convicted French-Algerian jihadist, for what she casually described as crossbow practice. 4 years later, in December 2014, Boumediene and Coulibaly vanished, leaving behind their apartment and their old lives. Just weeks later, one of the darkest chapters in modern French history would begin. January 7th, 2015, gunmen stormed the offices of Charlie Hebdo, a satirical magazine known for mocking religions, including Islam. 12 people are killed. The very next day, Coulibaly murders a policewoman. January 9th, he storms a kosher supermarket in Paris, killing 4 Jewish hostages before being shot dead by police. It was brutal, and it was calculated. And all the while, Hayat was already gone, on the run, slipping through borders, and leaving the chaos behind. Investigators believed Coulibaly drove her to Spain just before the attacks. From there, she flew to Istanbul and headed southeast, toward the Syrian border. Turkish intelligence had tracked her movements there. They noted her strange behavior and monitored her calls, but she crossed into Syria before they could stop her. She was last traced to Tel Abyad, a Syrian town under ISIS rule, and then nothing. She vanished, but her name didn't. After the attacks, French media dubbed her as France's most wanted woman. Authorities said that she wasn't just Coulibaly's wife, she was his radical equal, and some believe that she was even more extreme. She'd been in contact with the wives of the Charlie Hebdo shooters. She trained with weapons, and she had connections to terrorist recruiters.
The wife of Sheriff Kouachi made more than 500 phone calls in the year 2014 to Coulibaly's partner, Hayat Boumediene. This helps us establish that there was a permanent and strong link between the two couples.
And despite the reports of her death, including one airstrike in 2019, she kept resurfacing. 2020, a woman in a Syrian detention camp claimed that she had met Hayat just a few months earlier. Same face, new name, and still hiding. December 2020, Hayat's convicted in absentia in France. She's sentenced to 30 years in prison for financing terrorism and participating in a criminal network. But to this day, she hasn't been caught.
That Shamima Begum has lost her latest appeal over the removal of her British citizenship. Ms. Begum travelled to Syria to join the Islamic State group back in 2015 when she was 15.
February 17th, 2015. That's the day 3 British schoolgirls vanished from East London, setting off a media storm and one of UK's most debated counter-terrorism cases. Among them was 15-year-old Shamima Begum. Bright, soft-spoken, and about to make a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She boarded a flight from Gatwick to Istanbul, passed through Turkey, and crossed into Syria. Within days, she's in ISIS territory, and she never came back. 1999, Shamima Begum was born in London to parents of Bangladeshi origin. She grew up in Bethnal Green, a busy area of East London, and even attended Bethnal Green Academy. But she wasn't a known troublemaker. In fact, she was described as quiet, even a little shy. Now behind the scenes, something else was brewing. Along with two of her closest friends, Shamima began watching online propaganda, glossy videos, idolized stories about sisterhood, and posts that painted life under ISIS, the terrorist group known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, as something noble and exciting. Then they take their obsession to the next level when a smuggler helps them across the border. What no one knew at the time was that this smuggler, Mohammed Rashid, was working as this informant for Canadian intelligence. According to later investigations, his job was to gather intel, but in the process, he helped dozens of people reach ISIS territory, including Shamima. Just 10 days after arriving in Syria, Shamima was married off to a 23-year-old Dutch ISIS fighter, a man she'd never met before. Their life together was spent mostly in Raqqa, the capital of the so-called Islamic State. Over the next few years, Shamima had 3 children. All of them died young, from either malnutrition, infections, or just a lack of medical care. What she did while in ISIS territory has been widely debated. Some reports claim she served in the group's morality police, enforcing strict dress codes and possibly helping recruit other girls. One allegation even claimed that she helped sew suicide vests so they couldn't be removed. But none of these claims have been officially proven, and Shamima has denied most of them. Now, journalists who later interviewed her described someone disillusioned, hardened, and still trying to justify the choices she made. In early 2019, war correspondent Anthony Lloyd found her in Al-Hol refugee camp in northern Syria. She was 19, pregnant, and living in a tent surrounded by thousands of others who'd once lived under ISIS rule. She wanted to come home.
They had beheaded people, there were executions.
Yeah, I knew about those things and I was okay with it.
Now, when they asked her if she regretted joining ISIS, she said no. She called the beheading of prisoners shocking, but claimed she wasn't fazed because they were enemies of Islam. What she didn't say was that most of those victims were Muslims too. People who simply stood up against the terror ISIS brought with it. This interview hits a nerve in the UK. The public is outraged. Just one day after the interview aired, UK Home Secretary Sajid Javid revoked Shamima's British citizenship. He said she posed a security threat and should never be allowed back. That decision ignited a firestorm. Under international law, countries can't strip someone's citizenship if it would leave them stateless. The UK argued she still had Bangladeshi citizenship through her parents, but Bangladesh said no, they wouldn't take her. She was effectively a woman without a country. Since then, Shamima has fought a long legal battle to try and reverse that decision. She's lost every appeal, up to and including the UK Supreme Court, which ruled in August 2024 that she had no grounds to challenge that decision further in the British courts. Over the years, Shamima changed her tone. In interviews, she's asked for forgiveness and said she regretted joining ISIS. 2021, she cooperated with a BBC podcast and documentary, hoping to tell her full side of the story. She said she was manipulated, trafficked, and too young to understand what she was getting into. Some experts agree. They say she was groomed and exploited, and that stripping her citizenship set a dangerous legal precedent. Others would argue that she knew what she was doing, that she crossed a line, and there's no going back.
The trial's begun of a 16-year-old German-Moroccan girl accused of stabbing a police officer in Hanover in February on the orders of so-called Islamic
February
State.
26th, 2016. Just another afternoon at Hanover Central Station in Germany. Trains came and went. People hurried past one another, lost in headphones, phone calls, or thoughts about dinner plans. And then, everything changed. A 15-year-old girl in a long veil walks up to 2 federal police officers. She looked calm. She's carrying a small purse, nothing unusual. One of the officers asked for her ID. Instead, she pulls out a kitchen knife and slashed his throat. The officer stumbles back, bleeding heavily. His partner moves fast, wrestling the girl to the ground. She didn't fight. She didn't even speak. It was as if, in her mind, the mission was already complete. That girl was Safia S., And what happened that day wasn't random. It was Germany's first ISIS-inspired attack. And the most unsettling part, the attacker wasn't a seasoned militant. She was just a girl. Safia was born and raised in Germany. Her mother was Moroccan, her father German. She went to school, lived in a quiet neighborhood, and to most people, she seemed like a typical teenager. But underneath lay something much darker. From a young age, Safia was exposed to radical ideology. There's even footage of her at just 7 years old reciting religious verses alongside a controversial preacher in Germany. At the time, it didn't raise red flags. But as she got older, her interest in religion turned into something else entirely. By the age of 14, Safia is not just watching ISIS propaganda online. She's talking to them directly. And they were listening. November 13th, 2015, ISIS carries out a series of coordinated attacks in Paris. Gunmen stormed the Bataclan concert hall. Bombs exploded near cafes and a stadium. And in total, 130 people were killed. The world was horrified. Safia wasn't. The next day, she posted a message.
Allah bless our lions who carried out an operation in Paris yesterday.
And she wasn't just praising the attackers, she wanted to join them. That same month, she bought a plane ticket to Istanbul. Now her plan was to cross into Syria and join ISIS. Her contacts had arranged everything. But before she could make the crossing, her mother found out. She flies to Turkey, tracks her daughter down, and brings her home. For a moment, it seemed like she stopped her daughter from going too far. But she hadn't. Back in Germany, Safia stayed in contact with her ISIS handlers. If she couldn't get to Syria, they had another plan: bring the fight to Germany. And all she needed was a knife and a target. On the day of the attack, she left her home with the blade in her bag. She makes her way to Hanover Central Station and stood quietly, watching the officers from a distance, waiting. And then she walked over. One question about ID was all it took to set the plan in motion. The officer she attacked barely survived. Emergency surgery saved his life, but the incident shook the country. A 15-year-old girl, acting under direct orders from ISIS. It was unbelievable. Safia was arrested on the spot. She later confessed and even wrote a letter apologizing to the officer. But when investigators looked into her phone, the truth became clear. She had sent a video pledging allegiance to ISIS the night before. The group had guided her through every step. And so this really wasn't a moment of rage. It was all planned, calculated. And in the end, Safia was sentenced to 6 years in prison. And then an even more disturbing discovery. Safia's older brother, Saleh, had also been radicalized. Just weeks before his sister's attack, he'd thrown Molotov cocktails into the shopping center, aiming to kill as many people as he could. He was also sentenced to 8 years behind bars. And just like that, 2 siblings, 2 attacks, and 1 family consumed by extremist ideology. Their mother had acted quickly when she stopped Safia from leaving for Syria, but by then, it was already too late. Both of her children had been pulled into a world they couldn't walk away from.
It's a stark reminder. Radicalization can target anyone, anywhere, even the young. And when ideology meets access, tragedy can unfold. Because evil doesn't wait for adulthood. Sometimes, it's born early. If you believe in justice and exposing the hidden threats that shape our world, we truly appreciate your support. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments. What do these stories say to you about radicalization, trust, and the power of influence? Your voice matters. Together we can build a community that refuses to ignore the darker truths behind these global headlines. Join us next time, right here on Unraveled Crime, as we continue to uncover the stories that demand to be heard.